All right. We are on.
All right.
So, what do you want to talk about? State legislature,
Well,
projects around the lake.
Yeah, why don't we? Well, we can talk a little bit about projects around the lake because we just did a small thing, and I've been following this issue: the Lower Kissimmee stormwater treatment area proposal. Which this is one of those things. This is what you run into with this issue: is that you get these projects are very, very complicated, but once something like this comes to fruition, there's always going to be some sort of political issue. In some cases, just because the things are so large. And, this project is north of Lake Okeechobee. The land is actually owned at this point by a private company that's kind of in the sort of the fact-finding stage, if you will, working with South Florida Water Management District. And it would capture water coming in before it gets into Lake Okeechobee down through the Kissimmee. And it's in a spot where if you look at a map of sort of like the pollution hotspots north of Lake Okeechobee, I mean, this is where you want an STA. It is right south of some of the worst pollution, coming off some of these agricultural fields. And so it would seem to be in an ideal location. Now, I can't necessarily speak to the design and the capacity and all those things because, none of that's written in stone yet. I mean, there's.
Where's the project at in terms of how far along is it? It's just proposed at this point?
It's just proposed at this point. They've been doing their sort of due diligence and coming up with, here's what we're proposing to do. The South Florida Water Management District is going to be taking a look at that. The South Florida Water Management District has not green-lighted this project yet. They've been very specific about that, especially as there's been pushback. So it's sort of, going to go to the South Florida Water Management District at some point here. I'm not sure when that might be. But what's interesting about this project is folks in Okeechobee County now are opposing it. And they're doing so. There's a little bit of NIMBY involved, I think. There are some homeowners nearby who fear that this is going to raise their flood risk, and that they're not in a floodplain, but that they might have to get flood insurance if this stormwater treatment area is built nearby. There's also concerns, and these may well be legitimate concerns, that it's too close to the Okeechobee County Airport. FAA regulations apparently require a 5-mile radius around the airport to be clear of things that might attract a significant number of birds. And an STA is going to attract a significant number of birds, water, wading birds, that sort of thing. So as I understand it, this is 4.7 miles away from the airport. So just like sort of under that 5-mile radius. And so there's discussions, I believe, ongoing with the FAA over this and whether this can work. But what happens when you have a good project in the right place that runs up against local opposition? Because if you read the media coverage of this, and I've been at a couple meetings where this has been discussed, Okeechobee County commissioners will say this is a great project. We just don't think it's in the right location. And to the extent they're responding to their constituents' concerns, I mean, you get, what they're saying. But by the same token, a project like this, I mean, it's the type of thing we need to be building. And it's in the location we need to be considering.
What is just north of there?
It's pretty much just agricultural basin.
It's like what, citrus? And
yeah, if I can pull it up, there are some. Again, if you look at the mapping on this, the pollution mapping on the B map, I'll never find it right now, but
I'll look it up.
Yeah, it's going to be in the Basin Management Action Plans of the B map. See if I can find it.
Because it seems like if you have a bunch of ag there, that's kind of a dream come true to have that be cleaned up before it goes in.
Exactly.
That's exactly what we need.
Exactly. That that is.
And it's never going to be perfect. There's always going to be something increasingly there where you got to kind of squeeze it in. But if that's serving the purpose around management and cleaning it all up.
Well, exactly. I mean, there's a very good argument to be made that we need storage all around the lake. And we particularly believe we need southern storage, for water coming off the farm fields of the EAA.
But it's got to come in slower, too.
It's got to come in slower and cleaner. That's a huge aspect of it. That's one of the biggest problems with the lake. Not only is it getting too much water in, raising the lake levels, and then you have the problem with where's it going to go from there. We don't want it to come to the estuary, but
Yep.
you know, you also have a big issue with the cleanliness of the water going in.
Do you think that it would benefit to have the city of Stewart have a resolution encouraging South Florida Water Management District to go this route? I mean,
I would
from
suggest
a political
this-
standpoint.
You know, it's kind of it's germane in that it ultimately has to do with the cleanliness of the water in the lake, which is the cleanliness of the water if and when we get discharges here. So there's an issue there. It's kind of far away, and it's kind of, it would be hard.
What's the ETA on this project, as you're aware of it?
I have. Hang on a second. Okay, there's one of the. Let me see if I can find this map. I bet I'm not going to be able to find it. I had it.
It's a lot under pressure.
I know. You know, if I'd have thought
On
about
the
this
camera.
ahead of time, but that's all right. Yeah, hold on a second. I have a letter from the South Florida Water Management District.
Are they signaling at all which way they want to go?
They're kind of holding their cards close to the chest at this point, but
Probably
hang on a
smart.
second here. Okay, so here's. She sent me the letter. Here it is. Okay, so this is a letter that went from the South Florida Water Management District to Okeechobee County Commissioner David Hazelleaf. He's the chair of the Okeechobee County Board of Commissioners, and he's been particularly vocal in trying to get this thing moved or scuttled or whatever it is. Let me see if I can sort of find the synopsis of this. The district and FDEP began public exploration of a project in 2019, basically looking to, help lower the nutrient levels in the lake, so they can hit the TMDL, the total maximum daily load that's supposed to be coming in the lake. If you know anything about how Florida's flagship pollution reduction program revolves around TMDLs, it's supposed to limit the nutrients coming into water bodies. But almost across the board, we're failing to meet these goals. We're missing these goals by a mile. But in one respect, we need more projects such as this one. And this is kind of what this letter's saying. In 2019, they started looking around, working in Okeechobee County. This is part of the Lake Okeechobee Basin Management Action Plan update from 2020. Funding was made available. That we are, however, in the early stages of the project, and nothing is set in stone. There's still time to address Okeechobee County's concerns. I assure you and your commissioners the district will not support a project that exacerbates flood conditions or poses a threat to public safety.
But it seems like if you're storing water, it's going to have to, right? Florida's a giant sponge.
Right.
How can you not increase... Right, like the C44 reservoir, you're gonna have seepage. You're gonna have
right. Well, the district and the Corps has experience designing these things, and to the extent there are glitches, I was just out at C44 on Friday. The Army Corps sort of gave a little tour to some media and some other stakeholders, talking about the issue with the seepage, and the Army Corps sort of is taking the line that it's not as bad as it's been sort of portrayed in the media. Is that true? I mean, I don't know. They showed us, what happens is they've got the reservoir with the high walls, and then ringing the reservoir is what's called a seepage canal, and it's supposed to seep. I mean, there's supposed to be a certain amount of water that's seeping through, and it goes into the seepage canal, and then it goes back into the reservoir. Well, what's happening is it's seeping more than it's supposed to be. And they noticed that because
into that seepage canal.
But what happened was they noticed that the banks of the canal looked like they were getting chewed up. They said they first discovered this when they were doing mowing the lawn, mowing the grass around the canal. And all of a sudden it looked like the bank, in some spots was like all chewed up. That's an indication that there's more water seeping through there than is supposed to be. So they've taken steps now to try to minimize that. In the meantime, they're going to be working on it. In the meantime, apparently there's been legal action involving the contractor who built the reservoir. But what was interesting, we got into a discussion when we were out there talking about how the C44 reservoir was the first of the SERP water storage, reservoirs that was built. This is the first one, and there's others in the pipeline. Obviously, C-43 is going on along the Caloosahatchee, the EAA reservoir down in the EAA itself. This is the first one, and it's one of the biggest reservoirs, if not the biggest reservoir that's ever been designed for these purposes. So,
what's the size of it?
oh, I'd have to go back and look, off the top of my head,
Yeah.
but it's
10 miles or something.
something to
big.
that effect. Yeah, but so this is the first one they built, and they're having problems with the first one they built. So it kind of leads you to think, well, what happens? The EAA reservoir is going to be significantly larger than this one. And our organization has concerns about the EAA reservoir, the size, the design. This is just one of those sort of red flags that you think, it's hardly disastrous. It's hardly like, the C-44 reservoir is going to, collapse or anything like that. I mean, it's
but
just...
when you're putting your hope in, this is the path forward, right?
Yeah.
This is the beginning of the kind of projects that are going to be getting built.
Right. You don't like to see the first one out of the gate have problems.
I guess if you're going to have one that does have problems, it will be the first one.
Yeah, and it'll be a learning process for him, I'm sure.
That was the tone from, Major Bell
Mm.
when he spoke at the Rivers Coalition meeting is, that's the whole point of this period is we're figuring it out.
Right. This is a testing period. They're still in a testing phase. They're holding up to 10 feet of water. Originally, it was designed to hold 15 feet of water, 15 acre feet. They're holding 10. They're not, and they don't have any problems. It's not as if, holding water, in it at this point is contributing to additional, problems with the seepage. They know what the problem is. They're addressing it. But as I said, it's you don't like to see the first project out of the gate, have these
Doesn't
issues.
inspire confidence.
It doesn't inspire confidence, right? Exactly. So,
What else are you aware of with C-44 reservoir? Do you have any inside scoop?
It's a huge project. I was at the groundbreaking but the ribbon cutting 2 years ago. When they brought in all sorts of dignitaries to, tout the wonderful progress we're making on the Everglades and water storage and Lake Okeechobee, all that. So it's disappointing in that respect. But, again, I don't – it's hardly some disastrous thing. It's hardly something to be overly concerned about at this point. From a safety standpoint, it's not an issue really at all. It's just, from the design standpoint that we're going to be doing more of these, and that's kind of – we need to make sure that they're being built right, and we're not going to keep running into these. The C-43 has had all sorts of problems, legal problems with the contractor. The contractor was fired. There have been lawsuits filed out there. They've apparently brought some new contractors and work has resumed, but that's pushed back the completion date on that project. So it's not an easy thing building these huge reservoirs.
That's my concern for the EAA reservoir, right? Is we're saying it's 10 years out.
Mm-hmm.
But
I think that's optimistic.
Right.
I think to say that it's optimistic
because it's huge.
It's huge, but the thing you had to know about the EAA reservoir is it's nowhere near as big as was originally proposed.
Right.
We're talking. I think at this point it's like a 10,000 acre reservoir and a 6,000 acres worth of STAs, which is a 16,000 acre footprint. Originally in CERP they were calling for a 60,000 foot.
How did that bait and switch happen?
It wasn't so much a bait and switch as it was what was politically possible at the time. What happened was Senate Bill 10, shepherded through by Senator Joe Negron, who at the time represented Stewart and the Treasure Coast in the legislature. We couldn't find willing sellers. So early on in the process, identified the need for, and this came directly on the heels of the 2013 algae crisis in Stewart, the 2016 algae crisis in Stewart, which was horrific, and the community demanded action. And to his credit, Senator Joe Negron said, okay, he proposed Senate Bill 10. This was all about, acquiring land for and then building a reservoir in the Everglades agricultural area, which in concept everybody supported. This was the great idea. But what happened was early on in the process, the Florida legislature said, nope, we're not going to do eminent domain. We're going to take eminent domain off the table. We're not going to be able to acquire land for this project via eminent domain.
Why?
Government taking.
Why would they?
Well, you can be cynical about this and say, I think just, there's a lot of people in the legislature who have this very, property rights are sacrosanct and government taking is wrong. And even for the worthiest projects, government should not be allowed to take private property. I mean, I think that's kind of what it was. I could be cynical about this and say the sugar industry was probably whispering in people's ears. I mean, the sugar industry, I said everybody was in favor of more storage in the EAA except the sugar industry. And the sugar industry's argument was this is going to compromise our industry. We need this land for production, that sort of thing. So
is it true that sugar was basically given that land or for very little? I've heard different things. I don't know for sure. I've never really dug into this, but like the Van Hoels were given a lot of this land was just very
land grants. I couldn't
right.
I couldn't answer. But it was drained for the sake of for agriculture. It was drained for agriculture, and I just and it's interesting. I mean, they grow a lot of stuff in the EAA, but sugarcane is the number one crop. 63%, according to publicly available figures. 63% of the land in the EAA is used to grow sugarcane. And it's one of the most fertile regions in the United States. I mean, and they're the sugar industry is zealously protective of its land, of its industry, of its privileges. So when Senate Bill 10 came along, to whatever extent they played a role in it, early on we said, okay, we're not going to use eminent domain. That means we have to find people who are willing to sell land to the state, and there just weren't very many of them. So ultimately what happened was the land that we do have, some of it was already owned by the state, and we just cobbled together various parcels to make what we had. And there was a lot of disappointment initially in the conservation community because and just people in our area, because we knew we needed more. We wanted more land, as was originally called for in SERP. But it was, and I remember the term was, it was what was politically possible. This is what was politically possible to achieve. Yes, it would have been better for to have more land, to have a bigger footprint, to have walls. I think the walls of this reservoir are going to be something like 37 feet high or some damn thing. It's like ridiculous. There's nothing like this that exists in nature, and we're building them so high because we don't have a big enough footprint. So we have to build the walls higher. We have to keep more water in the reservoir. There are significant concerns. The whole idea of the reservoir and the attendant STAs, it's supposed to remove nutrients from the water, but the reservoir is going to be so high, there's a concern that it actually becomes a nutrient sink. In other words, instead of being a nutrient sink, it's going to add nutrients to the water, because there'll be so much in the bottom down in the muck because it's so deep. So, but again, this was what was politically possible. This was what, everybody said we need to do something. Well, this was all we were really able to do, and it was disappointing in that respect. A lot of people have pinned very high hopes on this. And I mean, certainly, my organization, Vote Water and Friends of the Everglades, we hope it's going to work as advertised. We hope, it's almost being touted as the answer.
It really is.
People are putting a lot of faith in this project. And I hope that faith is well placed, and I'd love to be in a situation where all the misgivings that we had were wrong. I would love to be in that position 10 years from now. Mm-hmm. We'll see, But I think, your original point, is correct. I think it's very optimistic to think that this is going to be done in 10 years. That's what the Army Corps is saying now.
What was the timeline on the EAA reservoir, or not the EAA, the C43 or C44 reservoir? Forgive me.
I believe it was.
Were we relatively close to being on track?
I think we were relatively close to being on track.
That's hopeful.
Yeah, but the EAA reservoir is larger, and it's like anything else. You're going to run into issues, But
and just with how expensive everything is to build right now, you wonder.
Well, exactly. That's another factor as well.
Budget-wise, is there enough appropriation? And
there's a lot of organizations that are beating the bushes for more Everglades restoration funding from the U.S. Congress, from the Florida legislature, and Governor DeSantis has made this a priority in Florida. And I see every sign that he's going to follow through on that. So I don't. There are a lot of groups out there, lobbying for the funding. I think they'll be successful. I think there's a lot of bipartisan support for Everglades restoration and for funding, as long as we don't hit a recession or something like that, and, which constrains budgets. I think, for the foreseeable future, at least, the funding will be there or should be there. And then, the project will get built and, as you noted, construction costs are going up, so it's entirely possible that ultimately this thing costs more than we thought it was going to. But again, if it delivers the benefits that have been promised, it will be a godsend. There's no
long
doubt.
term.
There's no doubt.
You weigh out cost. What is the cost benefit analysis of having discharges to the east and just continuing issues? It's got to be cheaper for quality of life.
Well, I think that's probably true. I mean, it's hard to put a precise figure on.
Because if you don't have clean water.
Well, yeah, but I mean, if you look at what the previous sort of algae crisis have done to this community, it's hard to quantify. Like, for example, real estate values. If you own a home on the water, obviously clean water is of vital importance to you, because if you got algae floating by, that's number one, it's going to be disgusting. Number two, it's going to be a health hazard to you. Number three, potential buyer is going to come and look and say, no, that sort of thing. So, it's hard to calculate the economic impact that the algae crises have had on this community. But we can say there were businesses that closed. There were businesses, like people out, like Ohana Surf Shop that like rents out like surfboards or paddleboards, stuff like that. It impacted those businesses significantly. It impacted real estate sales. For a period of months, during the time of the crisis, it was tough to sell a waterfront home in Stewart. It just was. And in fact, and the local real estate community has sort of become more vocal on this issue. They weren't initially. By contrast,
I get it, right? You don't want to have too much PR saying it's bad.
Right, and
but at some point it hits critical mass, and we have to deal with it and advocate for clean water.
In 2016, our algae crisis was an international story. It was front page of the New York Times. It was being covered by the Guardian in the United Kingdom, in England, and other sort of media outlets across the globe. The Washington Post was covering this story. And when you're in a situation like that, to say that, well, we don't want to say anything bad about this because it might be, might give us a bad name or might, be bad PR. I think you're past that point. By the point that you're getting international news, you're past the point of we don't want to say anything bad. And it's interesting, out on the Gulf Coast of, Fort Myers area, Caloosahatchee, where they've had issues, where they've had, not just blue-green algae, but red tide issues. Their real estate community has been very vocal in terms of saying more needs to be done. Captains for Clean Water is based over on that side of the state, and they've gotten a lot of support.
It's awesome what they're doing.
Yeah, they've got a lot of support from the real estate community. And again, it's kind of a no-brainer. You know what I mean? It hits you where it matters. It hits the bottom line, and it's just, and it's funny. Now the water looks pretty good today. It's hard to make a case for a lot of people that, the problem hasn't been solved, and there's still nutrients out there in the water.
But if you don't deal with it, it's going to be passive aggressive.
Exactly.
It's going to hit the fan. Everybody's going to be freaking out, and you're not going to be able to get much done. If you're progressively working towards it when it's not an active issue.
Right.
And everybody's got a cool head.
It's true. And, because you need to be able to, people need to understand that just because the water looks clear doesn't mean it's clean. I tell a story from when I was a kid. I was in Cub Scouts and Boy Scouts rather, and we went on camping, and we went on a hike the one day. And the stream, this we were kind of up in the mountains, and this crystal clear stream, and we were thirsty. We drank from it. We all got sick.
Yeah, you did.
We all got sick. Some cow upstream, did its thing, or whatever it was, but we all got really sick. It looked clean. It wasn't clean, and that's the case often here as well. We look at the water and it looks good, but then what's in it? What are the nutrient levels in this water? How's the seagrass doing? You know what I mean? And if we don't have a lot of seagrass, the water can look awesome, but it's a problem. We had 2 years ago, actually this past year, the cover of Vote Water's annual report was this beautiful photograph taken by our photographer Leah Voss, who's an awesome shooter, and it was a drone picture, and it showed beautiful clear water, and it was taken to Sailfish Flats, and on the one side you had a manatee, and on the other side you had a small school of fish. And it took me a while to look at that. It was such a beautiful photo, such an iconic photo. And it took me a while to understand that what I was looking at represented a problem. And you say, what do you mean? This is such a great, look at how clear the water is. That's in Sailfish Flats, and the area is supposed to be covered with seagrass.
Right.
And there was no seagrass. And in fact, that manatee was probably scrounging for food, looking for food, and couldn't find it because there was no habitat. There was no seagrass there, you know? So looks can be deceiving. And just because everything looks good doesn't mean it is. And so
You can't see glyphosate.
well, yeah, exactly, exactly. You know, you can't see the phosphorus and the
Right.
nitrogen in the water. You don't, you know, and like Florida Oceanographic Society does regular testing of the water, and they can, if you look at their latest data, you know, you can see exactly what, you know, what's in the water and that sort of thing. But the point is, it's a constant sort of, it's a running battle, and this is never going to be like a once and done, okay, the problem is solved sort of thing. You know, it requires constant vigilance. And from our perspective at Water, you know, we pay a lot of attention to the politics. We pay a lot of attention to the politicians. We pay a lot of attention in particular to the state legislature, because that's where a lot of the laws are going to get passed that are going to affect this either good or bad. And so what we've seen out of the legislature in the past couple of years on the good side of the ledger is that they've been appropriating, and Governor DeSantis is behind a lot of this, they've been appropriating a lot of money for what we'll call clean water projects, septic to sewer conversions. You know, projects like the one we were just talking about, you know, stormwater treatment areas, that sort of thing. You know, the Indian River Lagoon Protection Program was established last year via legislation, House Bill 1379, and that is going to allocate a minimum of $100 million for lagoon projects, you know, and you know, to help clean up water in the lagoon, and that's great, you know, and so we're seeing a greater commitment from our state legislature to fund projects that are going to clean the water, okay, in various, you know, hotspots. So that's on the good side of the ledger. What's on the bad side of the ledger is we continue to pass, our legislature continues to pass laws, new legislation that is going to make water pollution worse. So, you know, it's like I'm going to build this project to clean the water, and then I'm going to pass this law, which is going to make more dirty water. So how much progress are we actually making? You know what I mean? And I'll give you an example. One of the most powerful legislators in Tallahassee is a guy named Ben Albritton, Senator Ben Albritton. He's from Wakulla. He's a citrus farmer, and he is the Senate President-elect, which means that at the end of this year, current Senate President is Kathleen Passidomo, Senator Passidomo. Ben Albritton will be the Senate President next year. And they say that, you know, you never have more power than the session before you're about to ascend to the throne, right? So Ben Albritton is a very powerful guy, the chair of the Senate Appropriations Committee. He's going to become even more powerful, and he's an ag guy, okay? He's a farmer, and I get it. You know, that's his constituency. That's who he pays attention to. Last year, or rather, 2022, he got through a bill, Senate Bill 1000, that allows citrus farmers to hire certified crop advisors to come in and advise them on fertilizer use. It's called rate tailoring, okay? This basically, bottom line, means that he basically passed through a measure that's going to allow citrus farmers to use more fertilizer, which we oppose because, you know, more fertilizer on the land is going to mean more runoff nutrients in the water, okay? Well, there's talk, and I haven't seen any legislation to this effect yet, but there's talk that this provision that allows citrus farmers to hire these advisors and use more fertilizer is going to be expanded to all farmers across Florida.
That's great.
You know, now again, I haven't seen any actual legislation to this effect, but that's what folks are talking about. And then we have this situation where we're expecting a bill this session in 2024 that will preempt the authority of local governments like the Stewart City Commission to pass fertilizer ordinances with summer blackout periods. This was a big, sneaky thing that happened last session when a lobbyist for True Green, a former Speaker of the House named Steve Crisafulli, got a line inserted in a budget bill that allocated $250,000 to IFAS, the University of Florida Institute for Food and Agricultural Sciences, allocated $250,000 for them to study these type of fertilizer ordinances, which are in place in over 100 municipalities and 18 counties throughout Florida. The idea, kind of simple. We have our summer downpours. You don't want to be putting fertilizer with nutrients on your lawn right before summer downpour, which then washes it all off into the storm drains and into the your local waterways. It's the lowest hanging fruit. It's an ordinance like this is literally one of the least any municipal local government can do. Okay, and yes, there's very little enforcement of these fertilizer ordinances.
Right.
And yes, there's all sorts of why it's hardly the answer, but it's a measure that a local government can take that's very simple, that's done with widespread, and there's evidence that it works. It's a very simple thing local governments can do. Well, the fertilizer industry, the turf grass industry doesn't like this, and so there's this IFAS study was authorized. We're almost positive the IFAS study is going to come back and say, well, these bans don't work. These ordinances don't work. They don't really keep nutrients out of the water. Because there's some previous literature out there, and which we think is flawed, the way that they came to those conclusions. There's some previous literature that suggests this. And this study that they're doing is just a review of existing literature. It's not some exhaustive scientific inquiry. They're just basically looking at
it. Just gives them political cover.
It gives them political cover. And so we are positive there's going to be legislation coming down the pike this year that is going to prevent, and I don't know off the top of my head if the city of Stuart has one of these, but it's going to prevent the city of Stuart from passing an ordinance.
This seems like a bad idea if you're IFAS, and I'm not threatening anything. I'm just saying, like IFAS receives $25,000 a year from the city of Stuart for consulting. They receive money from the county as well. It would seem like a bad idea to subvert the authority of the people who support you.
There would be a very effective argument there.
Just for a $200,000,
IFAS is going to say, well, they didn't formulate the policy; they just did the study,
all right,
sort of thing. But that's how it's going to be utilized. And so the point being, at the same time as we're building these clean water projects, we're doing stuff like this, which is going to result in
that's directly subverting the right. We're talking a lot about BMAPs, basins. That seems like you're directly assaulting basin management.
Well, it's going to result in more at a time when we're supposed to be figuring out how we're going to remove nutrients from the water. We're adding more to it, And again, it depends on location and that sort of thing, But there's a whole lot of factors involved in all this. But yeah, and if you want to think of it from a fiscally conservative standpoint, it's kind of a waste of money if we're dropping all this money on these new projects, but we're only making the problem worse. It kind of makes no sense. But politically, it's one of those things where, the special interests who drive so much of the bus here in Florida, they get to continue to get what they want. And our legislature, on the other hand, can say, look what we're doing. Look at all this money we've spent on these clean water programs. Look at the action we've taken. Aren't we men of action? And haven't we, but at the same time, it's not like, you're going to tell the fertilizer industry, sorry guys, we're not going to be able to help you out. You know what I mean? That sort of thing. So that's a constant battle. I mean, like I said, the legislature there's always something brewing that's going to make water quality worse. There's always some sort of something going on out there. So you got to watch them like a hawk. And then that's part of what we do.
Do you guys go up to Tally?
Yeah. I've been up to Tallahassee. I was up last month. I'm going up in 2 weeks. Again, the committee weeks are going on now where, the legislature itself isn't in session until January, but they're basically up there because their committees are meeting and talking about some legislation that's coming down. There really hasn't been a whole lot of stuff filed yet this year. Session starts January 9th.
Are any of our local reps, do they, give you an ear?
In fact, Toby Overdorf is coming into the offices next week, I think it is. And I went and spoke to the legislative delegation at the legislative delegation meetings in Martin, St. Lucie, and Palm Beach counties. What that is all the state reps and senators who represent the region are there, and local organizations, come and speak to them. Most of it's like funding requests.
That's what,
for various, but for us, it was like,
is Votewater going to be able to stay out of the appropriations trap, or all of a sudden you get sucked in and whatever they want, you green light. You're going to stay separate, right? You're not going to get...
No, we're going to stay separate. I mean, yes. there's like I said, so much of this comes at you from different angles. There was a bill last year, and it was one of the worst ones I've ever seen. It was filed by a guy named Randy Maggard, Representative Randy Maggard, and it would have prohibited, it would have preempted the authority of municipalities and counties like the city of Stewart from passing any water quality regulations at all.
I did know. I remember that when that came about.
It was nuts. It was nuts and stuff like. But it didn't go anywhere last session. It could rear its ugly head again this session. So there's Tallahassee. These last couple years, the state legislature has been really big on preemption. They've been really big about telling local governments that you can't regulate this, that, or whatever it is. That the state has sole authority. And the rationale always is, well, we need to make sure that businesses have, the same rules from county to county. Business requires stability. Business requires predictability. Therefore, we can't have the city of Stewart going out here and passing these rules that they think are going to,
we know best.
We know best. Tallahassee knows best. There have been a lot of those type of bills these last couple of years. Key West got smacked with one a couple of years ago after they'd voted in 2 referendums in Key West to limit the size of some of the cruise ships coming in there because of the damage it does. A preemption bill was passed, and all of a sudden that local ordinance was rescinded, and bring in the big ships, that sort of thing.
Jeez.
So there's a lot of that goes on. And so, you're always on the lookout for that stuff. And then there's, other projects, there's other legislation that's, going to have more of a direct impact, again, some of these things we're talking about here. So it's just, you go back to this idea that if I get out on a boat today and I go out on the water and the water looks pretty good, and you're lulled into this false sense of security where you think everything's fine, and then what's the big deal? It's not a problem. But yet that, again, the water quality is not what, there's problems that you don't see, number one. Number two, that, with all these things that are cooking that we just talked about, all this legislation, there's the potential for it to get worse, and you just realize what I'd never understood is there seems to be this attitude in Tallahassee and among a lot of people really that it's fine. It's fine. Why do you guys worry about this so much? It's fine. It's fine. It'll be fine. It's not fine. It's not going to be fine unless we do something. You know what I mean? There seems to be this assumption that this natural resource, clean water, is endless. And it's not that big of a deal. And we've got, we haven't had any big algae crises here for a couple of years, so what's the big deal? You know what I mean? We can manage water better. We can manage water to the point where we don't have to worry about that. Well, until we get some of these huge, massive rainfall events or a huge, storm through here, or 2 hurricanes on back to back, which has happened before. There seems to be this assumption that we can juggle and we can sort of, avoid making the tough decisions, right? And Florida, and this is probably the case everywhere, but Florida just doesn't want to make the tough decisions. Florida doesn't want to do what really needs to be done, which is to go after pollution at the source. Do more to identify where the pollution in these basins is coming from, and to the extent you're able to identify specific sources of pollution, going to those sources and saying, we got to fix this. You got to do something. That sounds easy. That's very easy for me to say. The reality is, in a lot of cases, it's difficult to determine exactly where the pollution's coming from. You may be in a basin where you've got 6 farms, and who's contributing the most, and where is it coming from? And all we've got is this measurement, taken in the water downstream. How do we know who's responsible? And, then you get to the reality then is that, well, what are you going to do? Punitive measures might put someone out of business,
My concern is historically it seems like your larger corporations, right? Let's say that they trace that basin to, this citrus conglomerate, and the guys with money, the corporations that lobby, they're going to be fine. Mm-hmm. And so my concern is who punitively gets assaulted,
right, and
ultimately will benefit the large corporate interests is for the smaller guys to get waxed, and then they can buy that land.
Right.
That's my only.
Yeah.
How do you manage BMAPs fairly when money is lobbied and
So a key aspect in the BMAPs and the basin management action plans, which is it's a plan how we're going to do this, and the BMAPs rest largely on BMPs. This is where we get into all the acronyms, best management practices. Okay, every farmer in Florida is supposed to have adopted best management practices. Okay, which is a series of things they're supposed to do to minimize nutrient runoff. Okay, and most farmers have adopted this. There's some, and there's this whole question of, whether FDACS, the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, is responsible for disciplining, so to speak, those who haven't, or whether the FDEP, the Department of Environmental Protection, bears
Where
that
does it stand
responsibility.
currently? Is there punitive measures for not following a
Well,
BMAP? Is there any enforcement? Is this just like a...
What happens is there's supposed to be, the BMPs are supposed to be verified. There's supposed to be on-site visits I think it's once every 2 years. I believe that's correct. I'm not sure. I'd have to double check on that. But anyway, there's supposed to be site visits where, someone from, I believe it's FDEP, goes out and says, okay, you guys are supposed to be doing X, Y, and Z. Let's see what you've done. Let me see your fertilization records, just to show how much fertilizer you've put down, that sort of thing. Just to make sure that they are adhering to the tenets of the best management plan, the BMPs. And so there's been complaints that there's not a whole lot of enforcement, when they find that, in some cases the BMPs aren't being adhered to. It's all carrot and no stick. It's all of, we'll help you come into compliance. It's all, which, okay, you get that from a regulatory standpoint. They don't want to be Darth Vader. But, there's also questions about whether the best management practices, the scientific plans that we have are themselves going to achieve the nutrient reductions we assume they are. In other words, are they effective? Are they, we have a lot of modeling, computer modeling, that shows that these best management practices are effective. What we don't have is an equal amount of actual data showing that they're working. And the data that we do have shows that, in these, it's not really reduced the nutrient pollution in these basins. So, and the reality about the BMPs is they are developed not to maximize water quality, but the whole point of a best management practice is to maximize agricultural yields without having too much of an impact on water quality. In other words, water quality is secondary to the best management practices than the actual production of whatever is being produced. So, and this is the cornerstone of Florida's flagship pollution reduction problem, or program rather. So you've got this program with these goals. We're supposed to, by a certain date, we're supposed to have this much, pollution removed, and there's going to be only this much coming into the basin. And then we look and we say, wow, we totally missed that goal, which just happened with the St. Lucie BMAP, for example. And so now what the FDEP, the Department of Environmental Protection, is doing is, well, they're kicking the can down the road, and they're saying, well, okay, we'll give ourselves another 5 years to hit the goal we were supposed to hit this year. Okay? Well, is there any indication that 5 years from now we'll actually hit the goal? And what happens if we don't? So there's not a real sense of urgency, I would say. There's a lot of bureaucratic, there's a lot of meetings and, and publications, and there's a lot of bureaucratic, I don't want to call it paper shuffling, but that type
But it
of
doesn't
thing.
really seem to be a true priority.
It's not really, it's not working. The basin management action plans, again, this is Florida's big idea. This is how we're going to tackle water pollution in the state of Florida. They don't work.
How long has this been brewing, BMAPs?
It's been going on for, the BMAPs, I think, for the St. Lucie was initially adopted in 2013. So we're talking over 10 years in a lot of these cases, and almost none of them are actually hitting their pollution reduction goals. I know up in northern Florida, I believe it's the Florida Springs Council, has filed suit over the BMAP up there, and I think they've gained a little bit of, some ground on that, just because, what they believe what the FDEP is saying in the BMAP is just totally unrealistic. These goals, they're never going to be achieved, and that sort of thing. So, there needs to be more of a sense of urgency, but it's hard, use the term burning platform. It's hard to generate a sense of urgency if you don't have a burning platform. When we get algae blooms in this community goes bonkers.
Yes.
It goes nuts. And the political pressure that is then applied to the decision makers. Why aren't you doing something about this? Why haven't you done something about this? Why did it get to this point? Why did you allow it to get to this point? That becomes a huge headache. And like I said, after 2016, that was what prompted Senate Bill 10, which resulted in the construction of the EAA, or is resulting in the construction of the EAA reservoir. So when you get a crisis, people come out of the woodwork and they want to know, why did this happen? Well, it's a long and complicated story.
Which I think is a decent segue to say why Ed Killer, people like this, Vote Water is important. Friends of the Everglades is in the gap, in the lull in between crisis, right? You're continuing in the same way that you have other interests, other stakeholders, ag, companies, corporations that are actively lobbying and working step by step to achieve their objectives. Now in the gap of in between crisis, right? You have these slow moving objectives, and then there's crisis, and maybe they lose some traction and LOSUM, and but in the interim, Vote Water, you're actively championing that. You're continuing the objective of pushing back to make sure we're also considering the environmental impact of growth and ag.
Right, exactly. And trying to, again, education, I believe that, once people know what's going on, then, once people know what's going on, then they say, well, why are we letting this happen? Well, the reason we're letting it happen because not enough people are speaking out against it. And if you speak out against it, and that's what we try to do, is we try to make it easy. So when some of these bills come up in the legislature, we try to make it easy that people can call or email their local legislators, Gail Harrell, Toby Overdorf, John Snyder, whoever it is. We want to make it easy for people to know what the issue is, number one. So we need to explain it to people thoroughly. Here's what this bill says. Here's what it does. Here's why it's bad.
And you've done a great job at that, by the way.
Yeah, so that's...
And I hope you keep doing it and continuing to be bright.
That's the key right there, is you got to let people know how this is going to affect them. And then you got to make it easy for them to reach out. You know what I mean? You provide the email address. You provide the phone number. You maybe suggest some of the, talking points or whatever it is. Because, again, that public pressure is what motivates elected officials, to maybe say, well, what's going on here, or maybe I shouldn't support this or that sort of thing, So yeah, public education is key, and then mobilizing people, to act is key as well. So that's what we're trying to do, and I think we've had some success with that. And one of the things we do want to do is get more involved, right here at the local level. Because there's obviously a lot of issues, that go directly to this. I testified, for example, in Martin County when they were talking about their rural lifestyle amendment, which I thought and think was a terrible idea.
There's been this strange separation of understanding, I feel like, where we can parcel out and say there's going to be development, and then there's, environmental and clean water. But in reality, you can't be pro-growth and clean water. I mean,
it's tough.
It sounds a little bit reductionistic, but even with the baffle boxes and, we're talking about drainage, that's good, but it's never going to drain like trees. It's never going to, filter. That's what an STA is. When you're talking about filtering
man-made marshes, we're trying to mimic nature. No, I think it's true. I think you can be pro-smart development. The problem is we just don't do a lot of smart development here. It's
expensive.
Exactly. It's expensive, and it's just... But the bottom line is, the more of the natural land that you pave over with impervious surfaces, the more runoff you're going to have. So it's going to have to be treated. And you can say, well, we're going to build a retention pond. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. But what happens if there's a problem? What happens if, we got to be concerned. You see what's going on Canner Highway, and just the tremendous amount of development along Canner Highway.
Yep.
Well, ultimately, what's the impact that's going to have on the South Fork of the St. Lucie River? I mean, accidents happen, right? So we do our best to try to contain, runoff and such on some of these
in a part of the county that tends to flood.
Yeah,
I mean that's a basin,
right? So I think Florida's at the point. So I got to tell this story. I was working on something, and I came across in 1970, I believe it was, then Florida Governor Ruben Askew had appointed like a task force to study environmental issues in the state of Florida. And at the time the report came out, it was very interesting. You know, you used to be able to say things you can't say today.
About everything.
The task force essentially said, maybe Florida can't take everybody who wants to come here. Maybe we have to limit in-migration to the state for the sake of mitigating the impact on the environment. Maybe we can't accept all comers. Have you ever heard anybody say that today? Today, I mean, the reigning is, well, these people are coming and we have to accommodate them. Well, no, wait a minute. Who says we do? You know, why is it we must build more $400,000 luxury townhomes, 400 units here? I mean, there's all sorts of these projects going up in Stewart. Well, we have to meet the housing needs of the future. Well, who are these people? Why do we have to build things for people who aren't even at this point local residents?
Florida first.
Well, you know, seriously. You know?
Stewart first.
Right.
Martin County first.
Seriously. You know,
what is the quality of life, the ability of people to navigate safely on these roads first.
Right. You know?
And then if you have some capacity, let's talk about where.
Right.
But this idea that it's, you know, did you ever read The Swamp?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, by Grunwald. It does feel like Florida is a Ponzi scheme, which is sounds pretty derogatory.
But I think that's probably
But from like a development standpoint, from the beginning when the railroad came down here, it was to, you know, be able to flip the land for more money.
Right.
The more people coming down here, it's just, you know, you get more.
And all the real estate scams over the years, and people buying, you know, waterfront property sight unseen, and they get there and it's this, you know, total swamp. I mean, yeah, it's the history of
somehow we can't create a business model that's not this
exploitative. You know, it's
Ponzi scheme of land.
It's extractive. It's exploitative.
Speculation.
You know, and you know, this is one of the things. So now I got to put in a plug for this. One of the big things we're working on at Vote Water, we call it the Dirty Money Project. We've always tracked campaign finance, particularly as it pertains to the sugar industry. But what we've done, and we've had some volunteers helping us with this, and we're maybe on the cusp of getting involved with a partnership. But anyway,
cool.
What we've done with the Dirty Money Project is we've taken an exhaustive look at campaign finance at the federal, state, and the county commission level in 8 counties across South Florida.
Wow.
Okay. So we've amassed data on who's giving to who. Okay. The whole idea being that, you know, dirty money to dirty politicians equals dirty water, right? So money from, like, for example, the sugar industry is going to some of these legislators who then pass sugar-friendly legislation, which is ultimately detrimental to, you know, clean water, that sort of thing. And to go back to what we were just talking about, the issue of development, I never realized until I started looking at some of this data how much money what I'll call the sprawl industry gives to legislators and political action committees. It is just astounding.
Give me more detail, more context.
You know, if you look at developers, for example, how much developers are given, again, and at the state level, but the county commission level, you know, and if you go and just you tally it up, you know, the home builders, how much money are the home builders giving, you know, and you know, it stands to the whole idea of political contributions. You know, it's not so simple as to say, I give you this money and you vote this way. No, that's not how it works. Let me tell you how it works. How it works is I give you this money, and that doesn't automatically mean you're going to vote for what I want you to. But it does mean that I'll probably at least get a meeting with you because I'm a big donor.
Totally.
And, you know, so I'm going to have a chance to get some FaceTime with you. And,
Yep.
and I can talk to you a little bit about why I think you should vote a certain way on this legislation. And, you know, gee, it would really mean a lot to our organization, and we employ 500 people, and you know, the tax revenue involved, and et cetera, et cetera. And so you make a case. You have the opportunity to make a case. You get FaceTime with the legislator to whom you just donated $500 or $1,000 or whatever it is, you know. And then they say, "Gee, that guy's, you know, he's a, you know, okay. Well, I understand that point of view." And meanwhile, the people who were telling you or who would like you to vote against that legislation, they didn't give you money, and
they kind of disappear.
They kind of disappear.
Yeah.
They're not getting the FaceTime, and you don't have an opportunity to really, you know, hear their case. And even if they did have an opportunity to give their case, they didn't give you any money. So, you know, that sort of thing. So it's more subtle than I give you money, you vote this way. It's the process is more subtle, but ultimately it kind of does go in the same direction. You know what I mean? I gotta laugh. I was talking about Ben Albritton earlier. He was the sponsor of what we call the notorious Senate Bill 2508, which was 2 years ago, was the last second attempt. It was a Hail Mary pass by the sugar industry to get some rules. Basically, they wanted to solidify the way things are right now in terms of how water is managed. We want to make sure that is kept in perpetuity. It was sort of like the Reader's Digest version of that. And so they snuck it in I believe it was like a budget bill. They snuck it in a bill that only had one hearing. And they did it. It was very purposefully done. Senator Ben Albritton was the sponsor of this legislation, Senate Bill 2508. It was very.
They got Jackie.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yes, because she, among other people on the board, spoke out about it. This was Albritton, but at the behest of the sugar industry. Okay, Albritton's gotten a lot of money from the sugar industry, not only to his campaign. You know, he runs 2 political action committees.
So he disseminates it to the other candidates. Yeah,
exactly.
Man.
So that you know,
it seems like that's how the game's played.
It is how the game's played. Yeah. So the more powerful the politician, the more likely it is that they have a couple PACs at least.
And that's a guy who's going to be the Senate president
next year.
Gal.
Yeah, exactly.
But it seems like, you know, if you're making sure everybody's campaigns are well financed, you're the chosen one.
Exactly.
You raise the most money.
You know exactly. and his PAC, he runs a PAC called Advancing Florida Agriculture. Advancing Florida Agriculture has received, I think, at least $150,000 from U.S. Sugar. And all these other outfits as well. And you're right. You know, so there's a limit of $1,000 that you or I or anybody can give to any Florida politician. Right. Okay, but there's no limit on how much you can give to PACs. So if I'm an enterprising politician on the rise, I start my own PAC, and all of a sudden I'm getting all this money. And again, there's no limit to the contribution, so I can get $100,000, I can get $250,000, whatever it is, from all these, let's say, polluters type, you know, and you know, that could be the sugar industry, it could be the sprawl industry, it could be the phosphate mining industry, think Piney Point, right? It could be, you know, utilities, and utilities are some of the biggest special interests out there. They can all give me a whole ton of money, and then I can sprinkle it here, and it can go to you, candidate here, and it can go to a candidate there, and I am then known as someone who supports the candidacies of people who we would like to see elected to office, you know, and I can give some here, and I can, you've got a PAC too? Well, let me give a whole bunch to your PAC, and then you can do the same thing.
But the problem is that creates, obviously a situation now where if you are in the Senate or House, you're sort of giving over your voter card, right? I mean, you're going to honor, tell me how to vote. You know, I mean, so I would never say anybody's name specifically, but it does seem like it would breed a culture of that.
Well, you know, that culture exists. Yeah. So I'll tell you, when I was a newspaper guy up in Pennsylvania, I had an old saw say this to me about this. This is the Pennsylvania legislature, but I guarantee it works the same in the Florida legislature. It works the same anywhere. He says to me, this is how it works. He says, you get elected from your community to go serve in the state capitol. And you get there and you're full of vim and vigor and you're ready to go. You're ready to make a difference. You're ready to make a difference. Yeah. Leadership, let's say you're in the House. House leadership comes to you and says, you're going to vote how we tell you. You're going to do what we say. You're going to toe the line. Because if you don't, you will never get a piece of legislation through this body. You will never get anything done for your constituents. You will do what you're told to do. And then, maybe then, we can talk about some of the bills that you want to see passed. That sort of thing. And so if you are a state representative in your first term or whatever, all of a sudden you got a choice, right? You can vote your conscience and maybe vote against the way leadership wants you to, you know, your caucus leadership wants you to vote. But boy, you know, I've got this bill that, you know, $250,000 for my local community college. Yeah, no, sorry, you know. Or you can go along and vote the way leadership wants you to vote, rationalizing that this is how you know, it's just, this is how you play the game. This is how the game is played, and I really do want to get stuff done for my constituents, you know. And to do that, I'm gonna have to fall in line, you know.
Or you be a grenade. Or you be a grenade, and you change it. Mm-hmm. You fix the system. You at least make it messy enough that the whole matrix of it isn't going to stay together, and we're going to be real loud about it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what leadership is.
Yeah, well, I think that's true.
Do the right thing. At the minute that you sacrifice the trust of the people that circled your bubble, and you start getting in the mode of your own self-interest or how to advance your career in politics or playing that game, I would argue true leadership would be as insane as impossible as it would seem, trying to augment the system. I mean, crazy as that, no, you can't, no way.
Well, I think,
even by defiance, that you defiantly try to represent to the best of your capacity the people and the trust that they have in you to truly represent them.
I think you use the term grenade. You hear about soldiers who fall on a grenade to save their comrades. They do it once, right?
Yeah, fair enough.
So I think you're going to be a one-term legislator, because what happens is if you all of a sudden show these independent tendencies, and you're not voting the way you're supposed to be voting on certain legislation, then maybe next time you run for office, some mailers start showing up in your constituents' mailbox talking about, all the bad things that you did or all the,
But even you, right? Like, even you, okay, vote water. You say what you're supposed to say. You represent your constituency, which is the people who help support Vote Water.
Right.
You could very easily join the system. You could very easily get into it's so seductive. You could totally see, you get to meet this guy and those people, and they have resources, and they could really take care of Vote Water. Gil could be set up, but you don't.
No,
you do the right thing, and it probably costs you a lot of money, but you feel good, you sleep at night, and you don't go away, and you're not going to go away. And short of them killing you, which I don't think it gets to that point, hopefully not, but you keep saying the right thing and doing the right thing and being a thorn in the side, and the mailers will come. The negativity comes, but you don't give up.
It's true. There are organizations that, one of the great questions when you get involved in this line of inquiry, you have a choice. You're either going to be someone or an organization that embraces the idea of compromise and is happy with the crumbs from the table, because otherwise you're going to get nothing, maybe. Or you're going to be a maximalist and you're going to say, no, we're not going to compromise because some of these issues are too important to compromise. And we're not going to be satisfied with crumbs from the table because, clean water is vital to, what do we say? We say clean water is vital to, marine life, human health, and economic, vitality. So we can't compromise on the issue. We need clean water. So in the conservation movement, there are those who...
But there's the middle, right? There's the...
There is.
There's also you get your nose under tent,
right.
Camel's nose under the tent, but you keep pushing.
Well, the EAA reservoir issue is a good example of this. The EAA reservoir, as I said, is much, much smaller than originally envisioned in SERP. The design, there's a lot of questions about whether the height of the walls, the depth of the water. So, the question is, many anyway, conservation groups, environmental groups, wholeheartedly support the EAA reservoir. Believe we need to get it. We need to get it done. We need to get it built. We need to get it running. Other organizations, such as ours, are like, well, okay, I hope it works, but with a lot of questions about this, and shouldn't we be continuing to push for more land, that sort of thing. You know what I mean? So you can be happy with like I said, the crumbs. This is maybe more than just a crumb, but do you take something so you got something as opposed to getting nothing, or do you say it's not enough? You know what I mean? We need to push for more.
I'd imagine from their perspective, it's let's get it built, let's see how it's operating.
But if
it's failing, if it's not working right, maybe
you've invested billions of dollars in a project that isn't working.
100%.
You know what I mean? So, and we're not going to know. And all the people who are involved with it now are going to conveniently be gone by the time we realize, if it doesn't work, by the time we realize it doesn't work, it'll be an entirely new group. I mean, I'll be gone, we're talking, because it's 10 years until we get this built. It'll be 15, 20 years before we figure out, well, this kind of doesn't really, that sort of thing. So, but so there, you're right in what you were saying earlier. There's a lot of what I call fake environmental groups out there. There's a lot of
grifters,
organizations that I'd love to know where they get their money. I think.
You're saying sort of controlled opposition.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. There's a lot because the sugar industry in particular is very, very wily. They're very, very strategic, and so I would guarantee you that they are seeding. Let's use that term. They are seeding groups out there that sound like they're legitimate environmental groups, but always seem to take the big sugar point of view and always seem to advocate for discharges to the St. Lucie. As necessary and inevitable, and what kind of environmental group would ever do such a thing? Well, there are some out there.
Because if you can't corrupt one over time and shower them with money and favors,
right, you just
make a new one.
You just create your own, and you give them
clean
a name.
Water Pact.
You give them a name, and they show up at the meetings, and they get up and they speak, and it gives them a sheen of respectability, and But the real deal is, their whole purpose of them is to throw a monkey wrench into,
Listen, I can tell you from chiropractic research, from medical research, that scientists and PhDs are they're not cheap, but they can be bought.
Oh yeah, I'm sure.
I'm sure it's the same in environmental science.
It's the same thing. You know what I mean? The funder of the study is generally going to get the result of what they want. That's
weird how that happens, man.
Yeah, isn't it though?
Yeah.
Isn't it though?
Research follows money.
Yeah, it does. So. But I want to, the Dirty Money Project, which we're working on, we're looking to make a big splash with that. And ultimately,
what are you going to do with that information? How do you leverage that to the most possible good?
That's kind of where we're at. We're sort of, we're done with mostly done with the information the data gathering phase. We need to update. Third quarter results are out, and I need to add those to what we have. But the question is, how do we get the maximum bang for the buck on this?
So it's digestible.
Exactly. So we're talking, with our web guy about how we're going to present all this online. And basically people are going to want to know, what about my representative or what about my senator? So we need to make it searchable so people are able to go find their, elected officials and pull up the information on who gave to them, that sort of thing. So we're in the process of working out how we're going to build that interface, what it's going to look like.
How many political officials does this include? You talked about counties, but how many,
I
seats
have
and
data
people?
for more than probably 250 elected officials throughout Florida. And
could you do sort of just brainstorming with you, some sort of clip dossier on each one and how much and
it would be great. Who? Yeah, I mean that's
little video clips that you can have available.
And we want to call out some of the
for each person.
We want to call out some of the biggest recipients. Who's gotten the most dirty money, that sort of thing. Yeah, we definitely want to spotlight that sort of stuff. So once we get that figured out, and then there's a question.
So that's happening through the year leading up to an election cycle.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not just the 2 months before when everybody's scrambling to figure it out.
No, we've been working on this, and this will probably come out next year. We're initially hoping to get it out this year, but it's just a ton of work, and that'll be part of and we want that to be part of the discussion because it's an integral aspect of what's going on. So, and then we hope to get media coverage.
As that's coming online, come back and talk to me again.
Yeah,
we'll keep pumping that out
for sure
because that's huge.
It is huge. It is huge. And once you see, and ultimately what we want to do is, I say we want to make dirty money so toxic even dirty politicians won't take
100%.
it. Right?
It's not worth it.
And I give you an example of that in Martin County. Due to what's happened here in the past with the algae crises and the role that the sugar industry played in all that, and the extent to which the sugar industry was, is seen as kind of a bad actor in some respects. Yep. Our local legislative delegation does not take money directly from the sugar industry.
No.
Gail Harrell, Toby Overdorf, and John Snyder do not take.
It's a suicide.
Money Now. They do get money from PACs that get a lot of money from the sugar industry. So one might say they are indirectly funded by the sugar industry. But that so many others get money directly from them, they don't take it because they know if they did, they get crucified for it.
Yep.
Okay, that is ultimately what we'd like to see happen in all communities with all polluters.
And whatever your specific issue is in an area, like let's say it's development
Mm-hmm.
and overdevelopment, right? In Martin County,
Mm-hmm.
you're able to show,
Right.
What developer, what guy who clears the land, what company that does this,
Right,
and where
right.
that money went.
Right. Exactly.
Whatever the particular issue is in that county or city. Or,
Yeah, I mean, again, so we're tracking donations. We're specifically looking for info on sugar industry and agricultural industry as a whole, what I call the sprawl industry, utilities, the phosphate mining industry, the fertilizer industry, and then we're also looking at PACs because PACs, as
How do you parcel that out with PACs? Like how?
It's just so there
Just
are.
you see the money coming in.
Yeah,
and then-
we look at the money coming in, we look at the money going out, and some of these PACs, like and the polluting industries I just named, sugar, ag, sprawl, etc. They're all huge funders of some of these PACs. There are hundreds and hundreds of PACs, but a select, I don't want to say few, I would say there's maybe 50 to 75 PACs out there that get a lot of money, if not the majority of their money, from some of these polluters.
You should feel just as timid to take money from a PAC that is invested into by sugar as you would
Right.
sugar itself.
Right. So
Putting light on that should make that,
we've
it shouldn't
identified
matter.
what I call the big six, and actually there's 7 of them because I've identified another one. But there's what I call the big 6 PACs that get money from sugar that get at least a third of all their revenue from the sugar industry.
Yep.
Voice of Florida Business PAC, the Florida Chamber of Commerce PAC. And there's ones with these hilarious names like Floridians for a Stronger Democracy.
Totally.
That's one of the sugar PACs. And there's a whole bunch of other PACs out there with names like that.
You think they're probably sitting around kicking it, drinking beers.
Exactly.
Like throwing darts at
Exactly.
tag buzzwords.
Power to the people, and it's all corporate. It's all big corporations and stuff like that. It is. It is not possible to be cynical enough about this stuff, man. I'm telling you, you cannot be cynical enough. It's just, like I said, just the names of some of these PACs. Taking power back from Tallahassee or whatever it is, and it's like all these corporations like big.
Perfect.
But yeah, Floridians for a Stronger Democracy. Apparently, a stronger democracy involves the special interests having more of a say.
And destroying home rule.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. That's a stronger democracy. So.
Simple things like that.
Exactly. So,
What do you see beyond that as the future for Vote Water? Like, what are you guys looking at? Long-term goals?
Long-term goals, we want to have more of a regular presence in the state capitol. We get up there. I got up there last year. I'm going to get up there this year for the 2024 session. But we need to be there more often. We need to be like in their ears because you know what the sugar industry is.
Exactly.
The bad guys are there. The polluters are there all the time.
I noticed this and I had no clue until being in the city is there's nights where I tell people this, besides the commissioners, you got 5 people, there could be a handful of staff. There could be 10 people in that room that are setting policy for 25,000.
Right.
And who's going to be there every time are the people who it's their job.
Exactly.
Right. You got the developers, land use attorneys, consultants, like
Right.
they're going to be there because they're on the clock making $300 an hour.
Right.
They're there in their suits,
Right.
But if none of the people who
Exactly.
could be affected and will be affected by that decision are there, it does give the impression, even though I know better, but maybe to others, that they don't care. I know they're working, they're trying to like pay their bills, but I'm sure it's the same thing in Tally.
It's
when you have your representatives noticing like, well, these guys are here, nobody else
is. Exactly.
Man, Gil's here, Vote Water's here.
Yeah. Exactly. So we actually, this is last year, took a look and counted how many lobbyists the sugar industry has registered working for it. They have 50. The sugar industry has 50 lobbyists in Tallahassee. Well, how many clean water lobbyists are there in Tallahassee? Well, I go up there every now and then. There's maybe 1 or 2 who are there all the time, and so it's a mismatch. And we've had legislators tell us, where were you? Where are you? You're not here, and it's very, this is a whole other issue, but it's unfortunate that the state capitol is located so far north.
I've heard that
it disenfranchises people in South Florida for sure. There has been talk in the past about relocating it to Orlando, but I tell you what, our legislators in Tallahassee, they like it just fine. We can't bother them, you see. It's more difficult for us to get up there and, cause problems, so to speak. I think they love it. They think it's just fine where it is.
So from a legislative standpoint, would it be groups like Vote Water having more financial resources to lobby, more
Yeah.
people to function as lobbyists? Is it just sort of seeing that this is how the game is run, and beyond media and awareness, you're actually getting in the trenches? And
No, I think the more capacity we have, the more support we have, the more money we have, the more we're going to be able to do. I mean, it's just one leads to the other, and I think we do need. We are. Let me back up a second here.
Sure.
Vote Water is. Most environmental organizations are what are called 501c3s. They're sort of pure charities. And they're allowed to do certain things. But one thing a 501c3 cannot do is
lobby.
They can't. Well, they can do some lobbying, but they can lobby on issues. They can't lobby on individual politicians, and they have limits. They have a pretty hard cap. Vote Water is a 501c4. What that means is your donations to Vote Water are not tax deductible, but we can do politics. C3s cannot do politics. Okay, so a C3 cannot endorse or oppose a candidate. We can. We've done that with our voter guides in the past.
What about forming a PAC?
There's been discussion about that. There's been talk about that maybe that would be an effective thing.
Because it's going to be hard to get resources coming in until you officially sort of say, all right, this is the vehicle by which we're going to get this accomplished.
Yeah. Well, I think, again, we're looking to, always looking to sort of expand our email list, expand, the people who are seeing our content, put out good content, informative content, helpful content. We're doing more and more of that. We've expanded the newsletters. We've gotten some grant money that's allowed us to do what is called, we call them deep dives, like investigations into some of these really complicated topics. I've got a former reporter for the Stewart News who does that work for us. He's great, really knows the issues.
Who is it?
His name's Tyler Treadway.
Right
Used to be the environmental reporter over
yes,
here.
I feel like I've seen his
Yeah,
name,
you have.
read
You
his
have.
stuff.
He did a lot of writing on the stuff. So he's got a background in it. So he's a really good guy to have sort of, on our team.
That's awesome.
So he does that. And so there's a lot of stuff going on. But again, if we're able to build capacity, if we're able to get additional support and build capacity, because Vote Water can do politics and most environmental organizations can't, that's what we have to do. So we need to be in Tallahassee more often. We need to be lobbying more. We need to be in their ears constantly. When some of these bad bills come up, I need to be like in their office the next day, sort of thing, saying, "What are you doing?"
Do you have a relationship with Jordan Connors, who's our legislative delegate? Yeah,
No.
I would imagine getting linked up with, the different municipalities will hire somebody to function in that role officially.
Right, exactly.
Like I know John Mayle,
Yeah.
and but so you're in their ears as well, and sort of a network is happening. We're all going up there on the same page.
Yeah, that's a good call. Because a lot of the stuff, particularly when you're talking like preemption bills and stuff, is stuff that the city is going to be very concerned about, and might be wise to sort of coordinate strategies and that sort of thing. So but
I know it's putting a lot on your plate. You already have
no, dude. The plate's been full for a long time. I'm used to the plate being like this high, so
But there's not very many people and organizations doing what you're doing. So
we're trying to punch above our weight.
Yep.
I think we succeed at that, and I think and I always say I would love to be so successful that the problem that we're addressing goes away. Right? I would love, for me, I would like to be able to go take my family kayaking
totally
on the Indian River Lagoon and not think, what's in this water? Is it okay if my kid falls out of the kayak and swims for a bit?
Yep.
Is it okay? But you don't know that. One of our board members, who's down in Fort Lauderdale, comes to this issue, the clean water issue, because she's an avid paddleboarder. She got MRSA.
Exactly.
And it's like
Can I tell you? I went out for mini season. This was years ago now, and dove through, 4 feet, probably 9-10 feet of water, like just grabbing them without a tank, but through about 4 feet of that stuff and ended up with impetigo on my forehead with a mask hit. Yuck. And that was one of those moments.
Yeah.
It's not a big deal, but it is. Like, I can't even go in my own freaking river.
Exactly.
In Peck Lake and pull out a lobster and enjoy mini season.
Right.
Because now I got to go into my office, the next day with a rash on my forehead.
Right.
Like I
got to worry about this. Why should I have to worry about it?
It's ridiculous.
Why? It's ridiculous.
Right.
And I think almost everybody feels that way.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so that's the thing. It's like, how do we get to the point where we don't have to worry about that? You know?
And I'm sure you'd rather just be a travel writer or something. If you could just get out of this hole, if it was all fixed.
If it's all fixed, I'd ride off into the sunset, man. You know, give me a big horse and a cowboy hat, and I'll
Yes.
ride off into the sunset. You know,
Right on.
but you know, that's what we're shooting for. You know, we're shooting for a world where you don't have to worry about yourself or your kids when they get in the water.
And
you
how
know?
do, not to plug you, ridiculously, but how do people help you? How do people help
You can go to our website. You can sign up to receive our emails. You can donate. Giving Tuesday's coming up, and we're going to be, we just, sent out a newsletter today talking about that. And next week, on Monday, the day before Giving Tuesday, we're going to be issuing what we call our impact report, which talks about where we had an impact in 2023. It's sort of a, here's where your money's going sort of thing.
Goes out via email or
It
what?
goes out via email, yeah.
Is that the best way to interact with Vote Water?
Yeah, pretty
email
much.
List, or you're
Email
on
list,
Facebook?
social media, yeah. We've actually got, so Vote Water started out as an organization called Bull Sugar.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you sort of the history.
It started off, I believe, in 2014 as a result of the 2013 crisis.
Yep.
And really picked up steam during the 2016 crisis. And actually, during that period of time, we amassed a Facebook following. We have 316,000 likes on Facebook.
Yep.
Because we were one of the chief organizations standing at the front of the line saying this is not acceptable. The organization, really sort of stirred the pot for a while, but the problem is when outrage has a limited shelf life.
Right.
Okay. You can only be outraged for so long. And then it's like, okay, now what, and there needs to be sort of a longer term strategy. There needs to be, okay, what are we going to do this year, but what are we going to be doing next year sort of thing, And so, Vote Water sort of evolved. Bull Sugar evolved into Vote Water. The name change came about in part because, as hard hitting as the original name was, it was off-putting to a lot of people who wouldn't even listen to our message because they thought we were just vulgar. You know what I mean? That sort of thing. So, and Vote Water was an initiative that we'd already started as part of Bull Sugar, to try to encourage voting and with the voter guides that we were doing, that sort of thing. It just evolved. It evolved to have sort of a longer term strategy.
And the brand of what you are and what your function is, what you're doing, then your name that's associated with that becomes associated with it.
Right.
So the
Exactly.
Bull Sugar has that initial impact, but I do agree Vote Water now carries a brand.
Right. And
That's its own thing.
It does. And it says exactly what we're talking about because our
Right.
whole thing is, what's the Dirty Money Project, for example, is geared towards not just educating people, but making the case that if we're ever going to have better policy, we need better policy makers. Okay, we need to vote water. You need to get out there and you need to vote for candidates who are going to value, the water as much as you do. And when they get in office, you need to pressure them to vote water, that they are voting the right way on some of this legislation and they're not voting to, make things worse, that sort of thing. So it really is all about that whole idea that we need to vote water and then they need to vote water, that sort of thing. So yeah, that name sort of fits, kind of what we're doing now. You understand, the whole Bull Sugar thing, I thought it was great. I wrote about it a lot when I was a columnist for the paper here. I was very impressed with it. I thought, because it was a very emotional time, and I thought Bull Sugar, we were hitting like the right notes at, right then, and really marshaling the public anger. And
Right.
I really think that, Senate Bill 10, which gives us the EAA reservoir, probably might not have happened if it wasn't for Bull Sugar. We pushed hard, very, very hard for, something to get done. We're a little disappointed and ultimately as that we had to settle for less, but, there was a lot of momentum there at that time. But again, then 2017 and then 2018 and 2019, and the momentum fades a little bit. And again, if your whole thing is based on outrage has a limited shelf life. So you gotta evolve, and we did. So,
It seems to me like with LOSOM, you're going to have a continued refinement of how management is done. And now that, these projects are going to be coming online, you sort of have a contract with each of the individual stakeholders. And if all of a sudden we're really locked in lake restoration mode and, or toxic algae blooms are floating down the St. Lucie, you kind of have a case more for a legal, more than, policy and legislation. It seems like a lot of that's been put out there now, and it's almost going to be hammered out.
The good thing about LOSUM
courts,
the good thing about LOSUM is, again, LOSUM isn't perfect, but LOSUM is
it's evolving.
It is, but it's really going to be a step forward just in terms of, for the first time, they have to consider the impact on health and the environment. And there's going to be, but there's trade-offs involved in LOSUM, and the way the lake is being managed right now, LOSUM is not in effect yet. The fisheries, the National Fisheries and Marine, whatever it is, NIMS, NFMS, National Fisheries and Marine Service, or something like that.
I know, man. All the
National
acronyms.
Marine Fisheries Service, NIMS. I know, man. It's keeping the acronyms straight is a job in itself. They wanted to consult with the Army Corps of Engineers, and it had to do with the impact of LOSUM on sea turtles, and there's still some questions, and they don't think it's going to change anything materially, but they need to get the questions answered. So
what's the ETA on that?
It's probably after the first of the year. It was supposed to be in effect by now.
What is I feel like I've heard you talk about this in the past. What's your grasp on lake restoration mode and that sort of time frame that it locks us into of continued discharges? Do you have a pretty refined understanding of this?
I mean,
I talked to Ben Hogarth a little bit, and he was giving me some of it, and it's technical,
Yeah, I probably don't have as good of a grasp as Ben. The reality is, right now, the lake was at 16.11 feet yesterday, and it's been going up a little bit because we had so much rain last week. It's high, and there are people who advocate for the lake primarily, who are saying we have to get this lake down. We have to get this lake down.
The birds, the vegetation.
Well, the submerged aquatic vegetation is down to something like 2,500 acres. It's supposed to be a healthy lake would have 100,000 acres. Okay, so the lake is so high. It's the vegetation. It can't get the sunlight. It can't grow. It dies out. It's a big problem, and some of these folks have been raising this issue consistently now at these public meetings for the last couple months, and there's going to be, here's a preview for you, there's going to be a lot of pressure this coming winter to do discharges. Because
it feels like it already.
Because this is an El Nino, this is going to be an El Nino winter. They think it's going to be a pretty strong El Nino winter. They think it's going to be a lot wetter. The predictions are we're going to see a significant amount more rain than we normally would during a dry season. And if the lake doesn't get down, fast enough, if the lake doesn't get down at all, if it actually rises, depending on how much stuff, there's going to be a significant amount of pressure to do discharges this winter. I would not be surprised at all to see it. Now, the rationale is, well, it's better to do it in the winter before the algae blooms, get really cooking. Maybe, but it's still going to cause us all sorts of problems with salinity levels and everything.
But like you said, just because it's doesn't have algae floating in it doesn't mean it's clean.
Oh no, exactly. It won't be clean. It's not going to be clean. And again, it's going to muck with the salinity levels, and that's going to cause problems.
It's my only concern when we're, it's good that harmful algae blooms are being included now, but I do worry that it does create kind of a scenario where as long as there's not harmful algae blooms, it's okay, i.e. in the winter.
I think a lot of people are going to say that. I don't know that the core. I have to say that I came out of the LOSUM process, and just in general, with a lot of respect for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. I think they really did try to be fair about this. I think they really did listen. I think that they really, again, we didn't get everything we want, and that none of this means we're not ever going to see discharges or another algae crisis, But I think they and now even they are making an effort to avoid that sort of calamity. They are doing what they can. And, your lake advocates will say, well, you've traded that and now we have this calamity in the lake, sort of thing. So it's always a trade-off. But historically, we always got the short end of the stick.
Always.
And I think finally now we have a situation in a regulatory scheme where we won't always get the short end of the stick. Does that mean we'll get the short end of the stick sometimes, but not regularly. That was when I was a columnist for the paper here, that was my big thing was, how come we talk about sharing adversity, but we get all the adversity? Why did Martin County and the Caloosahatchee, the St. Lucie and the Caloosahatchee get all the adversity? And that's still a valid point today. Why is it that the sugar industry enjoys perfect drainage at a time now when the Southern Everglades is flooding? Okay, if we're going to share the adversity, shouldn't the sugar industry, shouldn't the EAA be required to retain some of the water on its own fields to mitigate the impacts downstream? LOSUM I think does a much better job of making sure that the adversity as such is spread out or accounted for, and that we're not always on the receiving end of it. Because for decades, the default answer was
100 years.
Open up the floodgates. For decades. I wrote in 1970. I wrote a column about how, or not. I didn't write the column in 1970. I wrote a column about how in 1970. Local people held a funeral for the St. Lucie. They had a coffin that they buried, and because we were getting such high volume discharges, this was before algae blooms, right? This was before algae blooms were a thing, but it was still crushing the estuary and just causing all sorts of problems. And they held a mock funeral for the St. Lucie, and I wrote that column in, I think, 2021, 51 years later, over half a century later, we're still having the same problems,
To their credit, Major Bell is going to be on here.
Oh, very good.
I know. I was
cool.
actually really surprised that they would be willing to. To their credit, how much they're willing to communicate.
Yeah. And
they don't have to.
I haven't been around this long, so I don't know, firsthand the history. But I'm told there was a time when they were not communicative like this, when they were not available, when they were not. And again, that goes back to what I said earlier about I have a lot of respect for the Army Corps. I think they've made the effort. And I think they're still making the effort. You know what I mean? And they want to make sure people...
Even to have the new PR guy, Jeffrey...
I have his name. Yeah.
That was there at the Rivers Coalition meeting.
Right.
It's like, wow, you hired somebody with a personality to come interact here.
Jeff Prater, yes.
Prater, that's great. You know, that shows that you care. You even hired somebody. You know, you're paying benefits to somebody to be here and interact because you care. That's wild.
They're coming out. They're coming out almost every single meeting and making a point of, and so it's great. It's much better. It's great to have those relationships with them. That if something's going on, you can make a phone call, you can send an email and say, and they'll get back to you. You know what I mean? And you know them. So, the tough thing with the Army Corps of Engineers, their leadership cycles through every 3 years or whatever it is, and if that becomes an issue, but. You just when you get to know somebody, they're gone. But as an institution, the organization has a commitment to this, I think, and that's good.
So going back to lake restoration mode from a technical standpoint, if you feel comfortable talking about it,
I'm not a technical guy in that respect. So
gotcha.
Yeah.
So my understanding roughly is if we don't hit what that target is in terms of depth, then it locks us into a period of years potentially where we're having to discharge. That flexibility, that's sort of the snake bite on the back end of flexibility is if they don't have their targets, because we're saying we don't want discharges, in the summer or whatever, and so we let it sort of like what's happening now, right? To where it's sitting too fat, and then all of a sudden they haven't hit their targets and now they're locked in and they have to do it for, I don't know if it was 3 years or 5 years, but they're going to have a scheduled discharge at that point until they reach their
I can't speak as eloquently to that, but I say
I'll get Ben on it and we'll see what it is. But that was pretty horrifying. It's now you are trapped into that cycle of discharging. At so many cubic feet per second. It's almost like you're back in Lourdes.
Right. So I mean, as I mentioned a few moments ago, the discharge has been going on for decades, and they've always been controversial. But I think now they're probably more politically radioactive than they've ever been. And that is in part due to the existence now of social media.
Totally.
And the ability of people to sort of communicate, in a way that we weren't just able to do so back in 1970 when they did the mock funeral.
Yeah, it's not just Stewart over here by itself anymore.
Exactly. And discharges, and particularly if we see another algae crisis, is going to be a huge political event. It will be a huge political event. It will generate outrage probably beyond anything we've seen so far. And again, just because the means to sort of spread the word is more sort of perfected now than it's ever been.
Yep.
So I tell you, policymakers at every level, from the Army Corps to the South Florida Water Management District to the local elected officials, state elected officials, federal elected officials, it will be the biggest headache that they've had to deal with. You know what I mean? So everybody has a vested interest in avoiding that outcome. If we get that outcome, and part of what worries me about the conservation movement and the reliance on the EAA is I fear that if we get another algae crisis, you're going to have a lot of people and organizations saying, well, yeah, it's bad, but we just have to get this EAA reservoir done. We just have to. It'll be like,
50 years
sit
later.
but it'll be like just we have to take the punishment. Just sit and take the punishment because help is on the way.
No way.
It's like it's like the families that are massacred, before the cavalry arrives, sort of thing. It's like
Unless their funding is coming from, the other side, I can't see how those sorts of organizations will continue to exist for much longer.
Well, I mean,
that's their official stance.
You ever see the movie Animal House and the Kevin Bacon characters while everybody's panicking around him, he's going, "Remain calm, all is well." That's kind of what the situation I think those organizations are going to find themselves in. Our thing is, look, we hope the EAA reservoir is a godsend, but by the same token, we know we need more water storage. We need to be talking about that now. We need to be pushing for it now. That we need to be looking for it now. We need to be thinking about it.
You were at the meeting not the last one, but the one before, where Drew Bartlett was saying if the EAA reservoir is constructed, we're good.
Yeah, I don't think that's going to be the case at all.
Right.
I don't believe that to be
I mean,
the case
why wouldn't
at
you
all.
have more than enough?
We need more water storage. That's a huge part of our overall philosophy. We need more. SERP calls for more. We need more. We're not going to solve this problem. And with climate change, changing things too, just in terms of rainfall totals and that sort of thing, it's going to be more of a challenge than ever. Again, I hope the EAA reservoir is flawless and works perfectly and it fulfills every promise that's been made about it. But even if that's the case, we don't have enough water storage. We need more storage because what we need to do, we need to be able to not just say we've reduced the probability of discharges by whatever the percentage is. What we need to be able to say is we will never have to have discharges again.
Right.
Okay? That's the goal we ought to be looking for.
That's a stated goal of the city of Stewart,
That's
right?
the goal. And that's the goal of the Rivers Coalition, of
Right.
which I'm a board member. Stop the discharges. And so the question about the EAA reservoir would be, is it enough? If it works perfect, is it going to stop the discharges for good? If the answer is no, then the next sentence is, we need more storage.
And when I got to sit in on Ross Dietrich, is Brian Mast's new legislative director, and I hijacked that meeting, asking questions because it was so cool. You had Major Bell and Lieutenant Colonel Polk.
Right.
You have a lot of not just the guys in the suits, but also the polos, the guys who are actually making the calls, that are logistically looking at it, the engineers,
Right.
and it was awesome. So how does this work? Why is that? Because Congress said that? Why won't they change that?
Right.
Ross, don't you think that should be the goal then?
Right.
So to be in the middle of all of that. And that was my question is, okay, then our whole goal here is zero discharges. And they're all just kind of like,
Yeah.
no, that can't happen. Well, wait,
Yeah.
we have a disconnect. Something's wrong here.
Right.
Because that's what we're aiming for. So EA Reservoir doesn't.
Right.
What?
Right.
Nobody's going to come out and say this is the, definitely we're going to discharge, but they're also saying,
Yeah. Well, no, that's it.
There's no
The EAA did.
we need to be able to discharge.
The EAA reservoir is not going to permanently prevent discharges. It'll help reduce the likelihood of them,
Right.
which is great, But again, does it stop? If your goal is to stop the discharges, and ours is, does it stop? Is it going to stop the discharges?
So what's in the way of more storage then? Is it just the
Political will is the number one. There's no political will to do it. There's nobody talking about it. We're trying to get it on people's radar screens. We've talked about that when I go and talk to the legislative delegations. That's one of the things we always bring up. We need to be talking about that. We need more storage now. We need to
because that's a state thing. That's South
it's a
Florida
state
water
thing,
management, right?
so we need to be looking for it. We need to be identifying potential willing sellers. We need to be identifying the areas where it should be. Let's talk to the scientists. Where should this go? Where would be the best location for this? Okay.
Is it a DEP thing or is it a South
No, it'd
Florida
be a South
water
Florida
management?
Water Management District thing.
And it would be, they need to have, do they have somebody that's in there that their job is primarily
I'm sure
auditing
they do.
to look for where,
I'm sure land acquisition is an
Right,
aspect of what
land
they do.
ac.
And the Corps would be involved in this well. I'm not exactly sure what the split would be.
but if politically we don't think that we need to,
Exactly.
then we have a huge issue.
So who's pushing for this? No one's
Right.
pushing. And that's maybe my biggest problem with the EAA reservoir is it becomes like we've got it.
It'll be the
figured out.
panacea.
It'll be the panacea.
Yeah.
When we ought to be saying, well, okay, what else do we need? Where, so we need to create the political will, number one, and then you need the funding, and then you need the willing sellers, and you need
The
all those
pushback
sorts of
I've heard
things.
is, well, we have all these projects already, lined up that aren't finished or, even started yet.
It's true.
So should we really
unfortunately.
even start new ones? Which the next question would be then, how do we fast track those?
Mhm.
What's taking so long?
Well, and the reality is it takes years. And talk about the EAA reservoir. Again, the legislation for that came down the pike in 2017. So by the time it gets, and here we are 2023, 6 years later, and it's going to be another 10 years at least until it gets built. So, and that's actually pretty quick. You're talking a period of 16 years from when it was dreamed up to the point, from when it was proposed to the time when it's, assuming it gets done in, 10 years from now. You're talking 16 years. These things take time. You need to set the ball in motion now. You know what I mean? It's not that, we're saying that we need to find more land for storage and that needs to take precedence and that needs to get the funding that would otherwise go here.
But it needs to
It's
be ready to go.
We need to be thinking about it. We need to be again, we need to be planning for it. We need to start working on it now. Okay. And we're not, and we're going to wait around to see if the EAA reservoir fits the bill, does the job. If it does, we're still going to have discharges. It's not going to prohibit discharges. If it doesn't work as advertised, if it doesn't hold as much water, if whatever it is, then the need for additional storage is going to be even more acute. You know what I mean? So we need to be thinking about it, and we're just not.
And what is it that we don't want to take off the tax roll?
That's
Some
part of
ag
it.
land or something?
Well,
or-
that's part of it. You may not have willing sellers. You may not have people who actually want to sell you the land that say, no, I need this land. And so what do you do then? Do you use eminent domain? I mean, governments, use eminent domain, but Florida, I told you that was taken off the table for the EAA reservoir, and it could well be in a situation like this as well, so land acquisition may be the biggest challenge.
Who makes that call? Like when we're looking at the Kissimmee, Lower Kissimmee STA there, who makes that call that's probably where we need some storage there in an STA? Is that South Florida's judgment call, the board?
I believe it would be South Florida.
So ultimately that comes from them.
Yeah, I mean, they're going to look
And what drives them? Is it political?
the data. No, it's the
It's
data.
data.
It's the data. They've got the basin mapped, and they know where the pollution's coming from, and they know, obviously there's the lake that's the river that's going into the end of the lake. That's kind of where it's coming from, and you need to have something close by there, and the canals that are existing there. So, they determine where would be a good place, and then in that case, in the Lower Kissimmee STA, a private company acquired the land, and they've done this sort of work up in like the Lake Erie region and that sort of thing. Name escapes me off the top of my head, but they were able to acquire the land. The state didn't have to do it. Now ultimately they turn it over to the state once it was built. If it gets built, that sort of thing. So
Yeah, it seems like that would be awkward for a state agency to operate on private land.
Yeah, exactly. It wouldn't happen. They'd have to
Right.
turn it over to the state, which is part of the plan. But it's a long process. It's a long process and it's complicated, and that's all the more reason to begin thinking about it now. Let's not rest on our laurels
No.
and say we've done the job, we've solved the problem, because we don't know that we have. And even if it all works as advertised, we're still going to have a problem. And just imagine the outrage in this community the first time after the EAA reservoir is up and running, and then we have algae discharges. Just imagine what people in this community
Or
are
even
gonna say.
discharges, period.
Yeah.
I mean, if it's
Right.
January and you're telling me we need discharges after we've waited 20 years for a reservoir.
Right. Exactly. People are going to say, what are we doing?
Yeah.
What are we doing? So,
And in the meantime, right, if I'm playing chess, a lot of that land has been sold. The value of it's quadrupled.
Mhm.
Now we're talking about building houses on it or whatever. And the likelihood of being able to secure that land 20 years from now is even less.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I mean, is that part of this game that we're playing? Is just buying time so that it can,
An academic exercise. I'm telling you.
be built on and
Yeah.
be developed.
Right.
And
Right.
if you're sugar, why, if you're going to trade out sugar revenue, ag revenue, which it's going to be for development.
Yeah, that's kind of the thought. Is
Right.
ultimately, when they're done farming down there, it's all going to be sold for development. Makes sense from their perspective, I guess. But what's the one crop that could be worse for our water than sugar?
Concrete. that's what Merritt said, and I
Exactly.
thought that was the best
Yeah.
line ever. Is our largest crop
It's concrete.
per square foot is concrete.
It's true, man. It's true. So I'm telling you.
Well, that was an hour and 45 minutes.
All right.
Unless you got any parting comments.
No, man. Just, I would tell, people who are listening to this, I would just say, pay attention to this stuff. It's complicated, but it's important, and it really does matter. Not just in terms of, what I said earlier, you want to know that the water's safe. But if the water's not safe, if the water's dirty, what does it do to this town? What does it do to the long term? Because if we can't fix the water in Stuart, Florida, if we can't ensure that the water here is clean and safe and it's not a problem, the long-term ramifications for that across the board they're stunning. Okay?
If I can't swim without getting impetigo on my head,
right?
If I can't fish and know that I can eat the fish coming out of the water, if my kids can't swim in the water because it's infectious and there's hell in it.
Exactly.
Until such time, we're not done.
We're not done, and you got to keep pushing, because if we don't keep pushing, it's going to get worse, and if it gets worse, then the problems are all compounded. So, learn about what's going on. And like I said, check out votewater.org. Votewater.org is our website. We got a lot of stuff on there. We got a lot of background about these issues. You can find our newsletters compiled under the news section, a whole bunch of stuff there, a bunch of links. And there's some other good, check out Friends of the Everglades.
Is Votewater hiring? Are you guys trying to grow?
We're hoping to grow. We need the resources to do that first.
Who do you need next? What's your next sort of asset in terms of?
I could use someone to help with policy. I could use someone to help with development, like, donors, that sort of thing. But at this point,
because I think sometimes if you show the need, right?
Yeah,
like, this is what I'm trying to do, then that donor might appear.
Yeah, no, I think that, if we could beef up our policy expertise, if I could have someone who was able to be in Tallahassee, if we were able to have someone who we had more of a presence where the decisions are being made.
You're not omnipresent? Is that what you're
I'm
saying?
not, as much as my kids think I am.
Yes.
I am not omnipresent. We can't be everywhere at once. Mm-hmm. So, but yeah, if we're able to do that, I think, we're going to be able to have much more of a direct impact on the actual decisions that are being made. Don't know that we'll be able to stop the freight train, but there'll be at least someone to lay down on the tracks. So.
But especially at a time where the development pressure in Florida is so intense.
Oh, yeah.
This is, even though there's not algae floating down the river, this is just as important.
Absolutely.
If there's not pushback and water is not, just as important as development in ag, it's going to get left behind.
It's true. Absolutely.
So,
absolutely.
Thank you for doing what you do.
Thank you for having me.
If you're game, we'll do it again at some point.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Always game.
Keep me in the loop on what you got going on.
Spread the word. Exactly.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah. Cool, man. Thank you. All right.